maybe I'm jaded. Maybe I've just played too much Path of Exile or got too burnt from Diablo 3's mistakes. But Last Epoch, developed by 11th Hour Games, is shaping up to be a massively strong contender in the ARPG scene, without the need to even leave beta. Patch after patch, improvements shower down, and the latest Sands of Majasa update is no exception. Today, we're going to dive into just why Last Epoch is breathing new life into the ARPG genre. Welcome! It's your friendly neighborhood Badger here, and it's time to talk about Last Epoch. Now, you may have heard of this ARPG from like-minded fans of the genre saying it's a good game to play in Path of Exile League downtime, or something more chewy than Diablo 3 to sink your teeth into. But it always gets compared to this and that, and I don't think that's necessarily fair, due to how far this game has already come, and how promising the roadmap is for the future. Granted, today I'm probably going to be making a lot of comparisons, but it's all for the sake of proving why Last Epoch needs to be in your rotation of ARPGs, or at least on the wish list. Right before we start, that sub button down there doesn't click itself. Check it out, I heard if you press on it, you get some pretty cool content. So, Last Epoch, what is all the fuss about? Recently, the 0.8.3 patch, Sands of Majasa, was released, and though the highlight was on the entirely new act at the end of the story, so much more was brought to this game. Improvements to existing skills and a bunch of new ones, massive sweeping balance changes to shake up the meta, new ways to target farm items, the list goes on, but I guess that's not super important at this stage. I want to talk about why the groundwork has already been laid for this game to grow into an ARPG powerhouse like Path of Exile or Diablo. So let's get right into it. First of all, let's talk about character progression in Last Epoch, and why it is a lot more straightforward than something like Path of Exile and forgiving, and a lot more in-depth than something like Diablo 3. There are 5 base classes in Last Epoch, these 5 that you can see in front of me right here, and each of them have masteries that you can spec into around about level 20-25 of the story, which is about maybe 2 to 3 hours of gameplay, maybe a little bit longer for new time players. Now, each of the 5 classes are quite typical in terms of your kind of fantasy genre. You've got a acolyte, which is kind of the necromancer. Well, one of the specializations is necromancer, but the acolyte deals with forbidden magic. You've then also got the rogue. The rogue is more of like a ranger type thing, so you can specialize into blade dancer, marksman, or falconer. Now, some of the specializations right now aren't available, but this game still is in beta, and that's what we're talking about here. You've then got the primalist. You've got kind of a melee character that deals with animals, shaman, beastmaster, or druid. You've then got the sentinel, forge guard, paladin, and void knight, and then last of all, you've got the mage, which is spellblade, sorcerer, and the upcoming rune master. Now, all of these 5 base classes here, as you can see, they're fairly unique, but they do kind of follow very similar fantasy type arcs as many other games in the genre, and I think that's very important. But what I'm going to do to explore a little bit further, to show you exactly how all of this works, I'm going to go on to my level 83 paladin character right here, which is a sentinel who has mastered the paladin, ascendancy. So first of all, on a character, you've got 2 different screens. First of all, I'm just going to keep talking about that actual specialization. And P, the passive skill tree, is this one right here. So you have a base class. You've got your Sentinel base class, which is usually a fairly basic tree right here. And every level that you go up, you get 1 skill point that you can then select or specialize into any of these nodes here. So say, for example, right here, Juggernaut gives me +1 strength, and I think 3 fire res and 3 void res each time that I specialize into this right here, and I've got 5 points into that, so that's 5 strength and 15 fire and 15 void. And then you've also got things like this right here. It has 1 dot in the middle, a connection, requires 1 point, so I need to put 1 point into this before I go into this gladiator node here, and the same there, same there. Now this bar here is kind of your progress bar in your passive skill tree. Because I have 20 points allocated, you can see that the progress bar has gone across 20 points. So say, for example, if I only have 10 points allocated in, I cannot allocate any of these nodes. And right now, I can't allocate these top nodes right here at 25 because I would need to allocate 5 more points somewhere here on the tree. Now, into the specializations. You've got your Forge Guard, your Void Knight, and your Paladin. Now, the really interesting thing is you can actually spec into all three of the base points of these classes here. So, if you're a Sentinel, and you've also mastered Paladin, like I have here, you can also, in Forge Guard, you can spec into any of these points below this chain right here. And in Void Knight, once again, you can spec into any of these points to the left of this chain. So that brings some really, really interesting elements to creating unique characters. But when you do specialize, you get the entire board. So you can see right here, I've gone all the way through in my Paladin tree, right up to the end here, Light of Rhea. And we all know move speed is king, so I've put 12 points into this last one right here to increase my lightning damage, which I'm dealing, and some move speed. That's the basic outline of how the passive skill tree works. Now, I can say that this is very straightforward and also very, very easy to fix if you make mistakes. All through the story and very early on, you can talk to this person right here, or a similar person in a town, a Chronomancer, who can re-specialize mastery points. Now, all it costs to re-specialize, if you click on it, it costs gold, basically. And the higher up you are in the tree, it costs more gold. And the further you are into a specialization of a single point, it costs gold, right? But you can respec, and then you can just allocate them again. This means, you can basically change your tree up on the fly. Just granted, you grind a little bit for the gold if you don't have any, but if you're playing your third or fourth character, you usually have a surplus of gold. This creates a really, really easy way to experiment through the story. Say, for example, in Path of Exile, if you're playing through and you get to Act 6, you've realized that, you know what, I don't actually really want to be one-handed melee. You realize you've taken about 15 one-handed melee points on the tree itself, and you've got maybe 4 regret orbs right there. You can't respec. The better thing to do is to just start a whole new character. Grind that extra, 6-7 hours, maybe more, depending on how fast you get through the story. In Last Epoch, you don't have to do that. Now, secondly, we also have skills. Now, your skills in Last Epoch are tied to the base class and the mastery that you choose. However, each skill has its own skill tree. So we can see the skill screen right here. Up the top here, we've got masteries, or specializations, sorry. You can have up to 5 specializations of skills. It's very easily laid out. Right here, the Sentinel, this is unlocked with character level, and each of the Void Knight, Forge Guard, and Paladin masteries will still get access to all of the Sentinel nodes right here. And then these ones are unlocked by spending points in the Sentinel passive skill tree right here. So if we click on, say, for example, Javelin, which I'm specialized into, if you click on that, you open up a Javelin tree. And you can spec into 20 points, and then you can get extra points on top of that to level. So it's really, really nice to level your skills through this system, and you can also respec. Now, if I was to respec this skill right here, what happens is I don't get the skill point back straight away, but all I have to do is grind a little bit more XP to allocate that point again. You can kind of think of it like de-leveling a skill gem in Path of Exile. If you de-level the skill gem, it goes back down, but, then you can level it back up again, and you can, in the case of Last Epoch, allocate the point again. As you level, you unlock more masteries, and the great thing about this is, say for example, I've got my 5, mastery skills right here, or my specializations. I've got Holy Aura, Lunge, Javelin, Hammer Throw, and Smite, but I can still use any of the other skills that I get access to. So I could use Rebuke right here. It just doesn't get access to the skill tree, so it's just the base skill. Now, this is really, really great, because it still means that you can use more than 5 skills, but you can only specialize in the 5 that you want to. This really just allows for so much customization. In these skill trees themselves, there's lots of different ways to convert damage. Smite, I've converted fully to Lightning, and so have I in the Javelin. And also you can get access to plus levels through unique items, or you can get access to changing how changing the, I guess, function of certain abilities with unique items as well. Say, for example, this Curse of Perseverance. It has 20% chance for Hungering Souls, which is an Acolyte skill, to fire 6 additional projectiles. So through the combination of unique items, modifiers on gear itself, and the skill tree for each of the skills, there's so much customization in there without it being too overwhelming. You can pretty much jump into this, and I always recommend anyone jumps into this without build guides. You don't need a build guide in Last Epoch. It's really great. That's all I have to say on the skills. Let's move on to point number 2. Secondly, we're going to be talking about ease of accessibility. Now, this is going to be a fairly short section, but it's really important because Last Epoch basically eliminates the Alt-Tab conundrum. That's something like Path of Exile has. For example, Path of Exile does not so much requires, but very much urges you to seek out many different third-party programs or options to improve your gameplay. One of the main big things here is, say for example, a loot filter in Path of Exile. Crafting a loot filter, it can be quite confusing, and you usually have to use outside sources such as filterblade.xyz or you know, just manually editing the text document itself. In Last Epoch, almost everything is built into the game, and future things like multiplayer trading is also going to be built into the game. They're expecting it to be in some sort of bizarre situation. Not bizarre as in crazy, a bazaar. You trade at the bazaar. But loot filters, right here, if you press Shift F in game, it brings up a loot filter area. Now, it may be a little bit daunting, lots of text and everything like that, but it's actually really easy to understand if you've played a little bit in the game. You don't need a loot filter straight away, but once you get to the start of the end game, I would say, that's when a loot filter becomes pretty important to really just solidify what you want in your character. And the great thing is, it is so easy to change on the fly. Say for example, I've got my loot filter set up here. If I don't want this specific tier right here, I can just disable the rule when, you know, I don't want that rule. Or when I want to show those items again, I can enable it right there. But I'll show you what a base filter does look like right here. So let's create a new filter. I'm going to call it sample filter. Right here, and we jump into the sample filter, and we can add up to 75 rules. Now, that's not 75 actual rules themselves. You can have many rules within each rule, and many sub-rules, so I'll just quickly show you here. For example, one of the best things to do with a loot filter straight away is to add a condition of hide, and then you can hide all rarities of normal, magic, so I'm holding Alt to select all of these at the same time. Excuse me. Normal, magic, and rare items, and add that to my loot filter. So that's just going to hide everything. However, as you can see right here, rules positioned higher in this list overrule those below them. I can add another rule on top of this that goes any affixes that have, let's say, damage type, any sort of damage type, any affixes that have a damage type, I can show, I can even recolor them, and I can even emphasize what the item label says right there. So at least 2 of these affixes, we're going to show them, and if that's above this one right here, it will override this. So any magic or rare items will still be able to drop if they've got 2 of these 16 affixes right here. And you can see how easy that is to build yourself, how easy it is to alter. If you're like, oh, you know what, I really want to drop this certain base type. I'm just going to quickly add a condition. I'm going to add an item type of this is what I really want. I really want a quiver, and I really want a nomad quiver, a base nomad quiver to drop, right? And then I can also add a condition. I only want a normal nomad quiver to drop. So rarity, normal. Well, I'll add that right there. So show normal nomad quiver. And then it's going to show you that, even though right down here it says hide. Very easy to understand, very easy to access within the game. Now, a lot of other things in the game are also extremely easy to access. The options menu is good, and it's only just getting better and better, or you can just press O to open the options menu. There's a lot of really interesting stuff right here. You can basically right at the top here, the gameplay, any of these ticks are really, really helpful. Health bars over players, health bars over minions, display health bars over enemies, damage numbers, because this game does have damage numbers, which is another great ease of accessibility. I can actually semi-test my DPS on this test dummy right here, and you can see the numbers. Or I could just disable that if I want to. Disable damage numbers, so I don't have to have all of that clarity, because this build does hit a lot, and it is fairly noisy there. That's really everything that I wanted to talk about, the ease of accessibility, but there are constant improvements to this and making everything as streamlined as in-game as possible. Let's move on to number 3. Thirdly, understandable items. This game has a slew of items, and it very much has its, normal, magic, and rare, and unique items in the game, but there are also items called Exalted. I'll just quickly go through all of these types of items very quickly, but I want to only focus on, right now, how understandable these items are. In Last Epoch, each item can have 2 prefixes and 2 suffixes, and they also have implicits that, give modifiers, so very similar to how Path of Exile does work in that regard, but every single item in the game, apart from idols, which are different, and we'll talk about those right at the end, every single item has 2 affixes, 2 suffixes maximum that it can have. Not only this, obviously each item has its own set of affixes that can roll within the item, but it's very understandable because each affix can have 7 tiers. It's not like Path of Exile, where some affixes have 1 to 2 tiers and others have 13, 14. Everything has 7 tiers. The top 5 tiers, the first 5 tiers, I should say, are all craftable. You can craft them through the crafting system itself, and tier 6 and tier 7 are loot drop only. So say, for example, these noble gloves. We've got 2 prefixes here of increased throwing attack speed and strength. Those are both tier 5, and it does say right there for you, max craftable. Now I'm holding control and alt to be able to show all of this right here. But then you see the suffixes right there. You've got a tier 2, chance to apply frailty on hit, and a tier 5, max craftable, chance to shred armor on hit right there with the gloves. Now that's all very understandable. Now, there are 2 extra tiers, tier 6 and tier 7, which are drop-only tiers. Now, these are purple items. If they've got this is an exalted modifier, basically, is what it's called. So any exalted modifier shows as purple, and it is tier 6 or tier 7. They are not able to be modified unless you remove that modifier through the crafting window itself. So basically, in a nutshell, 5 tiers of craftable, 6 and 7 tiers of drop only, but you can still craft on those items there. Unique items function exactly the way you would think unique items do function. It's just, an item that drops that has a lot of unique modifiers on it that can be build enabling, can be leveling, or can be, pretty trash because, let's face it, ARPGs wouldn't be ARPGs without trash unique items. Lastly, you've also got idle slots over here. Now, idols only have 1 prefix and 1 suffix, but these are a bit more specific to certain skills a lot of the time if they're much bigger idols, and you have lots of different sizes of idols. So it's all about, placing idols around and trying to maximize the kind of functionality you get out of your idols. So say, for example, I'm actually stacking 3 of these Ray idols here, the Adorned Ray idols, with chance to cast Smite when I hit with throwing attacks. So I've got 1 here, and 1 here as well. Then I'm stacking a couple of Attack, Crit, Multi, and Shred Armor. I think I've got 2 of them here. One of them is % missing health restored on Lunge right here. But Throwing Attack, Critical, Multi, because I'm a critical build. And then a couple of slots over here, which are, I can just slot in some small idols right there as well. These are drop only as well. You can never craft on idols. You will only find them dropped on the ground, but, you can use that loot filter to sort for them as well. Understandable items, amazing in-game. Very, very, very good to not have to read any sort of document to basically get your head around this. I will just quickly say as well, G, the glossary, has all the information you need. It is so good. If you're like, wait, what are implicits again? I'll just hit this. I'll read about implicits. Most of the time in the game, everything is really clearly laid out. There are, a couple of confusing things just because it's still in beta and they might need to reword some things, but most of the time, totally fine. Let's move on. Next, let's talk about visual clarity and boss fight design. I'm going to run some clips underneath this just so you can have some gameplay going in the background as I do talk about this. But basically, this game feels really, really smooth in its clarity, in its visual clarity, I should say, and the boss fight design. Now, sometimes, say for example, even on the build that I'm playing, you might be able to see in the background here, I'm procking a lot of skills here, and the game is not fully optimized, so there can be a little bit of chunking in terms of frame rate sometimes if you're playing weird builds like multi-proc builds like the one that I'm playing. However, I don't know exactly how to describe it, but it's just, there's so much visual clarity that is in this game that just makes it really enjoyable to play. Everything that you come across, or most things you come across, I should say, they're going to be telegraphed. You're going to be able to see on-ground effects really easily, and you're going to be able to move out of them. The boss fight designs themselves really elevate this. There are often indicators on the ground that aren't just like straight boxes or lines that are just, arbitrary, but do very much indicate the damage type that's going to be coming out, the area that is going to be either slammed on or some other type of ability coming through. And the telegraphs are really engaging, really make you work, and difficult to dodge, but if you're paying attention, you can very much outmaneuver these bosses. I said a lot on stream as I was leveling through this story, and especially the new Act 9. In Last Epoch, if you die to a boss's mechanic, you know what you died to. 99% of the time, you know, oh, so that's what happened. Next time you jump into that, you will then know how to dodge that, based on prior indicators that happened when you did die to the mechanic. In something like Path of Exile, that can happen, but a lot of the time you're kind of throwing your body against something to try and figure it out. It might be 10, 20 tries, I'm talking about you, Cirrus, before you actually understand what is actually going on, where the boss is, blinking to, or where the mechanic is coming from, what kind of damage is being dealt. It's really difficult to understand, and in Last Epoch, that's a non-problem. I don't know how to explain it much more than that, other than if you get killed by something, 99% of the time you know what you got killed by, and there's a little bit of a death recap telling you the type of damage that killed you. Now, in some cases this can be a little bit misleading, because if the very last tick of damage that hit you was very small, but the majority of damage came from something else, then, that's a little bit confusing. But in most cases, Last Epoch is really good at letting you know what is going on, and letting you know what has happened in the past, which I think is just really good for a game. As long as they keep this clarity moving forward, this is just going to turn into just an amazing RPG. Not that it isn't right now. Anyway, let's move on. Now, the very last thing I want to talk about is the roadmap itself. Now, I'm not going to, harp on about this because, this video is already getting pretty long, but that really just shows my enthusiasm for this game, I think. And I think it's really important to let you guys know a couple of the in-depth mechanics of this game. Now, the roadmap itself is looking really good, and on the website, the developer blog is an amazing place to really just see what the developers are going through and how everything is, looking to expand. So the last one was in August, a multiplayer progress update, and that's one of the bigger new updates coming. But any of this stuff can really show you what is actually... So say, for example, they did a developer blog on the Necromancer updates that were coming in this patch that were released. TLDR, the Necromancer updates were kind of trying to make Necromancers a little bit more passive in terms of their gameplay, because people really enjoy that, and they've got a lot of feedback on that. They wanted gameplay to be a bit more passive on the minions, rather than having to keep summoning minions. The multiplayer progress update, they're bringing multiplayer to the game. They're also talked about how they're going to be bringing seasons, like Path of Exile, into this, and trying to stagger them outside of Path of Exile season time, so not actually trying to compete with Path of Exile, which is really nice. They've also talked about a bunch of other things I'm not going to go into, but basically all I'm really trying to say is the developer roadmap for this game is looking so promising. The devs are really listening to everyone, the devs are updating everyone with everything that's going on. Now, I do think this is something that Path of Exile does really well, and, each to their own, but I do think Path of Exile is doing a really good job right now of kind of redirecting their course. We'll have to see where that goes. But Last Epoch is in a place where I think if they release, well, when they release 1.0 of this game, it's going to explode. I'm very excited. Obviously, there are downsides to this game. You may have seen the character models of that Sentinel that I was playing there. It's pretty clunky. The armor doesn't look very good. There are definitely some bugs. I've got a bug right now that if I play for more than 5 hours, it basically disables my file explorer and I have to go into my control panel and restart file explorer. There's a few bugs like that. There's some crashes that do happen, but they're always on top of trying to fix the most important things. For example, there's some really difficult mobs that have came in the Act 9 patch, which therefore means that they're now in monoliths and everything like that. They're fairly overtuned, and the devs are really looking at trying to figure out whether they're going to nerf them or anything like that for people, or whether they want to keep them in at that state. So I don't think it's unfairly punishing. I just think it's the mobs are a little bit more difficult than the rest of the mobs in the game right now. So yeah, could stay. That's all I really have to say. I hope you enjoyed this. If you want to actually purchase Last Epoch, you can do so either on Steam or you can do it on my Nexus store. There's a link down below. Now, Nexus is a store. I'll just quickly show you here. Nexus is a store where you can purchase games from. You can even purchase Path of Exile microtransactions through here as well. And I get a little bit of a cut from it. Now, you can see that if you add something to your cart, it will kind of tell you. I think if you go to the checkout, it'll tell you how much I actually get from it as well. Usually would tell you. Well, if you go to the check... Oh, yeah, Badger will receive $9.19 from this purchase of $34.99, which is pretty darn nice. Now, granted, depending on what country you are, Steam does have localized pricing and Nexus doesn't have localized pricing. You might just get it a lot cheaper from Nexus, but if you do want to support me, then Last Epoch is a really good way to do so through Nexus. I get a substantial cut from this, and you also get a Steam key. It's not like anything else. Steam key goes straight into Steam, so it's basically like getting it on Steam. So if you're in any sort of place where the prices are very similar, please consider getting it on Nexus. It very much supports me. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. Remember to hit that sub button. Come catch me live on Twitch because I'm streaming this game at the moment. Yeah, that's all I really have to say. I'm enjoying my time so much, and I hope you do too as well. I'll catch you all around. See you later.